The sky had turned an unnatural shade of red. Cities around the world were ablaze as colossal alien ships hung motionless above them, casting long, menacing shadows. The alien broadcast came with a voice that carried the weight of doom, its monotone devoid of humanity, but crackling with unbridled power. "Humans," it began, "your era has ended. Your defiance will only prolong your suffering. Surrender or face extinction." The message wasn't a bluff. Within hours, coordinated strikes reduced the most fortified military installations to rubble. High-tech weapons flashed with eerie green light, decimating resistance wherever it emerged. In the aftermath of the first wave, chaos ruled the streets. Families abandoned their homes. Politicians scrambled for futile negotiations, and soldiers met an enemy they neither understood nor could match. Earth seemed lost. That was until Jack Steele stepped forward. Jack had retired from active duty just 6 months ago. He had spent 20 grueling years in the Navy SEALs. Years that had forged a reputation as one of the military's most ruthless and effective operators. If there was an impossible mission, it became his. If an enemy refused to be subdued, Jack ensured they weren't around to resist again. His time in uniform had cost him much, a marriage, friends, and on most days his peace of mind. But as he sat watching the devastation on television in his modest cabin in Montana, he felt that something more profound than his own scars was at stake. "This isn't just another war," Jack muttered to himself, gripping a half-empty glass of whiskey. "This is slaughter." The camera feed cut to the charred remains of what had once been New York City, smoke curling skyward as alien war machines stalked the streets. Civilians ran for cover in vain as bolts of green energy rained down. Jack's gut twisted in a way he hadn't felt since his first deployment, and suddenly, every instinct told him this fight wasn't over, at least not for him. Within hours, Jack was back in uniform, though this time without the flag. There was no chain of command, no politicians whispering orders. He operated alone, enlisting a handful of trusted allies, former teammates who had seen him at his worst but also his best. Together, they vowed to take the fight to the invaders, no matter the odds. Their first mission was a simple one, at least on paper. Jack and his team needed to gather intelligence. Unlike in conventional warfare, there were no defectors to interrogate, no technology to reverse engineer. The aliens left no survivors to speak of. It was the first and most glaring lesson in their sheer ruthlessness. Make no mistake, Jack told the group as they crouched near the remains of a decimated military base in Colorado. They think they've already won. That's the advantage we'll exploit. Using the base's underground tunnels, they infiltrated the nearby town, now converted into a forward operating post for the alien forces. Advanced machinery hummed and alien soldiers moved with robotic precision, towering over the rubble. "Eyes sharp," Jack whispered into his comms, his tone controlled despite the knot in his stomach. Years of combat had trained him to compartmentalize fear. One soldier slipped ahead of the group, positioning an electromagnetic charge beneath a hulking alien patrol vehicle. Another disabled a perimeter scanner, clearing a path for Jack. Step by step, they moved deeper, charting the layout, counting troops. But alien senses were sharp. A wrong move, a misplaced crunch of rubble beneath a boot, sent the compound into high alert. Jack's team barely had seconds before green bolts of energy lit the night sky. "Ambush positions now!" Jack barked. Even as the words left his mouth, he had already aimed his rifle at the first incoming soldier, firing a perfectly timed shot into a narrow seam in its helmet. The alien collapsed, its massive frame hitting the ground with a metallic thud. Jack and his team fought as though possessed, their every movement precise, every shot lethal. While the aliens had strength and superior weaponry, they lacked Jack's years of training in guerrilla warfare. He used the terrain to his advantage, driving the squad into tight spaces where hand-to-hand combat rendered their ranged attacks almost useless. Here, Jack's ruthlessness was unmatched. One alien fell to a blade between its armor plates. Another was felled by an explosive trap rigged with salvage materials. By dawn, the small alien post lay in ruins. Jack stood at its heart, smeared with dirt and alien blood, watching as the survivors regrouped in the distance. His chest heaved with exhaustion, but his resolve was unbroken. "They bleed like us," he said, his voice grim and resolute. "That means they can die like us." The mission had been costly. Two of Jack's team hadn't returned, and for a moment, grief clouded his thoughts. But the knowledge they had gained was invaluable. Scavenge data drives and weapon fragments hinted at weaknesses in the enemy's armor, as well as potential plans for larger strikes. Sitting around a fire later that evening, Jack let the silence settle over his remaining squad. He could see the haunted look in their eyes, the same one he carried within himself. Yet he also saw their belief in him, an unspoken trust that he could lead them to victories no one else dared dream of. "This was just the beginning," Jack finally said, his voice low yet commanding. "We've shown them we're not sheep waiting for slaughter. Now, we prepare to hit them harder." As he spoke, somewhere far beyond Earth's skies, the Galactic Command reviewed reports of the day's failed post. The soldiers spoke in their guttural language, recounting the unexpected resistance. A single word, however, was clear amid the alien dialogue: Jack Steele. He was no longer just a man. To the aliens, he had become something else entirely. Something far more dangerous than any weapon they had ever encountered. The makeshift base Jack and his team had carved out deep in the Rocky Mountains was little more than a cave reinforced with salvage materials. Yet, within its cold, shadowed recesses, humanity's last hope for survival flickered against the suffocating darkness of extinction. Each day brought new challenges. Food supplies ran low, morale wavered, and the enemy continued their merciless advance. But Jack Steele didn't have the luxury of doubt. The stolen alien data drives revealed a startling truth. The Galactic soldiers weren't merely conquerors. They were purifiers. Their primary directive wasn't territorial expansion, but the annihilation of species deemed a galactic threat. Earth wasn't being subjugated. It was being erased. "What's on this planet that they're so afraid of?" muttered Ramirez, Jack's second in command, as he scrolled through the alien files with wide, incredulous eyes. Jack leaned over the flickering holographic screen. "Maybe it's not what they're afraid of. Maybe it's who." His tone was cold, resolute, every word etched in steel. Jack's strategy revolved around asymmetrical warfare. There was no sense in open battles against an enemy that dwarfed Earth's armies in firepower and technology. Instead, he focused on inflicting precise, crippling blows, hitting supply chains, sabotaging alien weaponry, and unraveling their communication networks. Every mission was a high-stakes gamble, a delicate dance between audacity and disaster. Their most daring raid yet came weeks later, when intelligence pointed to an alien power station on the outskirts of the Nevada desert. Jack knew the risks. It was crawling with enemy troops, its defenses formidable. But the potential reward was worth every ounce of peril. If destroyed, the station would sever the aliens' energy grid across the western United States, buying humanity precious time. "High risk, high reward," Ramirez said as the team suited up in the dim glow of their base. "This one's got suicide mission written all over it." Jack shot him a dry smile. "You know me, Ramirez. I never liked easy." They moved under the cover of darkness, their breaths muffled beneath high-altitude masks as they descended into the arid expanse. The alien installation loomed ahead like some monstrous skeleton, its sharp edges glinting under the stars. From a distance, the hum of energy pulsating through its conduits was almost hypnotic, like a giant heartbeat. Jack divided the team into 3 groups. His plan was exact. One unit would plant explosives on the station's main conduit, while the others created distractions to draw enemy attention. But as they moved closer, the subtle tension in the air told Jack something was wrong. "We're not alone," he whispered into his comm. Alien forces materialized from the shadows, their towering silhouettes emerging from camouflage bunkers. It was a trap. "Fall back," Jack ordered, but the command came too late. Green plasma lit the desert as the aliens unleashed their devastating weaponry. Sand erupted in geysers of molten glass, forcing the team to scatter. Jack's mind worked as furiously as his legs, weaving together options and contingencies even as he narrowly avoided a blast that scorched the earth where he had just stood. This was no ordinary engagement. The aliens were adapting, anticipating human tactics. For the first time since the conflict began, Jack felt the heavy pressure of being outmatched, of encountering an intelligence as cunning as his own. Even amid the chaos, Jack spotted an opportunity. The aliens' focus on overwhelming the distractions left their central power core vulnerable. With a wordless nod to Ramirez, Jack signaled a last-ditch effort. While his team provided covering fire, Jack darted through the battlefield like a shadow, narrowly avoiding volleys of energy bolts. He reached the conduit, the massive structure throbbing with alien power. Working with precision born of years of high-pressure missions, he armed the explosives and synchronized their timers. Just as he planted the last charge, the towering frame of an alien commander loomed above him. The creature lunged with terrifying speed, knocking Jack backward. His weapon was torn from his grasp, and his body screamed in protest as he hit the ground hard. For a moment, the alien hesitated, as if recognizing the man before it. Its piercing eyes glowed faintly, full of curiosity, perhaps even respect. Then it lunged again. Jack wasn't a man who begged for mercy, nor was he the kind to die passively. His hand found the blade at his side, and in a motion too fast to follow, he plunged it into the joint between the alien's armor plates. Hot, viscous ichor spilled over his gloves as the creature staggered backward, gurgling in pain. Jack wasted no time, pulling a backup firearm and unloading 3 clean shots into its chest. The alien fell with a thunderous crash. Dragging himself to his feet, Jack staggered toward his extraction point as the countdown ticked toward 0. Detonation in 3, 2. Ramirez's voice crackled over the comm just as a brilliant light engulfed the night sky. The explosion roared like 1,000 thunderstorms, reducing the alien station to ash and leaving nothing but scorched metal in its wake. The mission had succeeded, but at a steep cost. Half the team didn't return, their faces haunting Jack as he slumped against the cave wall that night. The losses weren't just numerical, they were personal. Every life snuffed out felt like a heavy stone added to the weight he carried on his shoulders. As Jack stared at the crude map pinned to the wall, he felt a profound shift within himself. He wasn't just fighting to delay humanity's end. He was fighting because surrender was an affront to every value he had ever stood for. And yet, something gnawed at the edges of his mind. The alien commander's hesitation, its momentary recognition of him. It wasn't a random event. The enemy was evolving. In their orbital command ship, Commander Veklar studied footage of the engagement, his sharp claws drumming rhythmically on the armrest of his throne. Still, the humans called him, a name Veklar now knew well. He did not fear the man. Fear was beneath a warrior of his stature, but he respected him, perhaps more than any adversary he'd faced in his centuries of conquest. "It seems," Veklar murmured, a faint smile playing on his lips, "we are fighting not beasts, but men worthy of the battlefield." Jack didn't yet know it, but his greatest challenge was still ahead. The end came in silence. No green flashes tore through the skies. No explosions echoed across the ruined earth. Instead, the alien ships simply arrived, monstrous shadows blocking out the sun. The Galactic Command's fleet now encircled the planet entirely. There was no pretense of strategy this time, no subtle movements or surgical strikes. This was eradication. Jack Steele stood atop a ridge overlooking what had once been Denver. The city was now an unrecognizable sprawl of ash and twisted steel. Behind him, his ragged resistance fighters, those who still remained, prepared for what would likely be their last battle. "I won't lie to you," Jack said, his voice carrying over the gathering. It was steady, calm. "This isn't the kind of fight you win by walking away alive. It's the kind you win by making them remember why they shouldn't have come here in the first place. The crowd was silent, their faces carved with weariness and resolve. They'd followed him into impossible missions before, and each time he delivered. But now the odds felt insurmountable. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the alien ground troops approached in endless waves, metallic forms gleaming under the dim light. Jack knew this wasn't just an assault. It was a final show of dominance, the Galactic soldiers making their statement. But Jack had made preparations. Over the past week, he and his team had transformed the ruins into a death trap. Entire skyscrapers had been rigged with explosives, and choke points were fortified with stolen alien technology. Every inch of the city had become a battleground where the enemy would pay for every step they took. As the first wave of Galactic soldiers crested the ridge, the trap was sprung. Explosions ripped through the enemy lines, sending shards of metal and flame cascading into the air. Hidden snipers picked off stragglers, while automated drones buzzed overhead, dropping improvised charges. Amid the chaos, Jack moved like a ghost. His every step carried purpose, his every action aimed at maximizing devastation. He wasn't just fighting to hold the line. He was fighting to make them hurt. Deep in the orbital command ship, Commander Veklar watched the unfolding battle with keen interest. He had studied Jack Steele's tactics, his unorthodox strategies, his ability to turn even defeat into a lesson. The human was unpredictable, dangerous, and deeply fascinating. "It's not chaos," Veklar muttered to himself as he analyzed the scattered resistance movements. "It's art," one of his lieutenants interrupted. "Commander, shall we deploy the annihilation strike?" "The fleet is in position." Veklar's gaze lingered on the battle below. Victory was certain. It had always been certain. But something within him resisted. Was it curiosity? Pride? He dismissed the thought, rising from his throne. "No," he said finally. "I will face him myself. Send the transport." Jack's hands were slick with alien ichor by the time the second wave retreated. Around him, the battlefield was littered with the smoking remains of both his people and the enemy. Every victory felt hollow, every breath a labor. Yet, through it all, he stood unbroken. It was then that the sky above shifted, drawing his attention. A smaller alien craft descended from the mothership, sleek and silent. The resistance fighters stirred uneasily, weapons trained on the descending vehicle. Jack raised a hand. "Hold your fire," he said. "Let's see what they've sent us." The transport door hissed open, revealing a single figure, Commander Veklar. The alien stood taller than the soldiers Jack had faced before, his armor intricate and ceremonial. There was no weapon in his hands, just a long, deliberate stride that brought him within feet of Jack. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to pause. Dust hung in the air, the silence broken only by the crackling of distant fires. "You are Jack Steele," Veklar said, his voice resonating with an unexpected depth. "It wasn't a question. And you're the one who thinks this planet is yours," Jack shot back, his hand tightening on his blade. Veklar inclined his head slightly. "I could destroy you now," he said, though there was no malice in his tone. "Your resistance is valiant, but futile. Your people are spent. Your resources dwindling. Surrender, and I might grant mercy to the survivors." Jack squared his shoulders, meeting the alien's gaze without flinching. "You think we bow after everything we've fought for? You don't know us at all." Veklar's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger, only curiosity. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "You forced me to see something I hadn't in centuries. A fire I thought extinguished. Humans, primitive as you are, fight as we once did, desperate, relentless. You may even be worthy of survival." Jack's jaw clenched. He didn't trust the alien's words, but there was no mistaking the note of respect in Veklar's voice. Still, he wouldn't risk his people's freedom for an empty promise. "Worthy enough to stop slaughtering us." A moment passed, heavy and charged. Finally, Veklar spoke. "Perhaps. There is strength in you, a reminder to my kind of what we've lost. He turned to gaze at the battlefield before continuing. But my command is not absolute. The decision must come from the Conclave. I will delay your annihilation until that decision is made. Use that time well, human. With that, he turned and boarded the transport. As the alien craft ascended, the resistance fighters murmured in confusion and disbelief. Ramirez stepped beside Jack, his voice laced with suspicion. You really think they're calling it off? Jack's expression was hard, unreadable. No, but we just bought ourselves time, and time's all we need. Despite the reprieve, Jack knew the fight was far from over. The aliens weren't saviors or negotiators. They were predators. And predators, no matter how respectful, never truly spared their prey. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack allowed himself one fleeting moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, humanity's fire would burn bright enough to survive.